Vultus here for a little update. I guess this could be part of the podcast, although I don't really know whether doing gameplay footage technically can be called podcasting if you're just talking over gameplay footage. But, well, I'll roll with it. I'll roll with it. And just on this update, I'm recording this on December 26th. The day after Christmas, for those of you who are not learned calendar-wise, and just doing some updates. So basically, I don't have any fans, so I don't really have anybody that regularly watch my... messed up my sentence there. I don't really have anybody that regularly watches my videos, so I don't really have someone who can tell me, oh, I like this series, I don't like that series. So if you're just a passerby, please would you kindly take a look at my other videos and tell me which series you like, which ones you don't like, so that I know which episodes to make. Yeah, I haven't actually recorded anything in quite some time for anyone who's followed me, which is probably none of you, but let's do this tournament here. Let's see who's in. That's me, Roaldos. This isn't going to be a Perisno series. It's just me playing a game while doing the podcast, just to give something entertaining to watch other than some background that I've made in MS Paint. So. Those are my followers, some noblemen, some tournament goers, and filthy casuals to get wrecked. Okay, let's bet the top, and there you go. I think the game runs slightly slower because I'm recording, so I guess that's a problem to do. Okay, no, I messed up. Now that I think of it, I'll finish this not in the game, okay? I'll finish this podcast at another time. See you in a bit. And I'm back, a couple days later, admittedly. And, well, let's talk. What should we talk about? Well, element of the day. Today, I don't have my little table of elements next to me, so I can't use my pointing stick to point at it. But I will draw it out of a hat. And this hat is not a literal hat, but rather a proverbial hat, which is indeed my head, which is currently not wearing a hat, to be honest. And so, I have to say, copper. Spelled with a CU, similar to a cuprium, as I believe the Latin would be for it. Copper is very malleable, and ductile, and has been very useful throughout the ages of history, and even some prehistory. So that's great. So I'm just glad to be here, back on YouTube, just chilling, and I want your feedback on my other videos. I want to know which videos do you want me to make sequels to? Which series do you like? Which ones do you not like? Etc. So in recent issues, remember the Paris bombing? Yeah, it was a terrible time. I wasn't there, but my prayers go out to those involved. And milk, it's good for you. It's got calcium. It also has some fats, unless you're drinking skim milk, which, to be honest, is just water with maybe some calcium in it, really. I wouldn't drink it. It's got no flavor, you know? You know what I'm saying? If you don't, well, do a taste test comparison, you know? You see that milk that is not skim milk is thicker and has more substance to it and a greater amount of nutritional value. Of course, in most areas, especially where I live, it's illegal to trade in unpasteurized milk, which contains even more nutrients than pasteurized milk due to the pasteurization process, removing all those nutrients. Of course, the problem with unpasteurized milk is that it's difficult to know whether it's safe because, well, it's not been pasteurized, to be honest. And I guess theoretically people could sell it if it were legal under the label of caveat emptor, buyers beware, because but the government isn't that risky. The government doesn't want to have it. They don't want to deal with all that problem, so they just ban it. Yeah. The end of 2015. A very transformative year in the world. You've got Syria and Iraq with the Islamic State rampaging through it. Let me look up what the latest news are. Let's see. Just a quick Google search on news. Just Google News. CNN Money. Why Ted Cruz's gold standard pushing is bad. Is a bad idea. Article by Heather Long, by Heather Long, December 28th, 2015, 11:56 a.m. ET. Remember that movie? That's a while back. Okay, Ted Cruz's chance of next president arising. Okay, so he's more likely to become the next president, but he's for the gold standard, and they somehow think that's a bad idea. And here's a quote here. Most economists now agree 90% of the reason why the U.S. got out of the Great Depression was the break with gold, by Liaquat Ahmed, author of Lords of Finance. Okay. Well, let's be honest. The gold standard keeps our currency on a balance, and I don't think that breaking with the gold standard is the reason that the U.S. got out of the Great Depression. I think that's a very simplistic way to put it, simply because there are many, many factors involved in getting the U.S. out of the Great Depression, and just the gold standard alone the breaking with it cannot be put as the main reason for the end of the Great Depression. On the other hand, you have to look at it this way. If we have a gold standard, inflation is very unlikely to happen unless somebody finds an immense amount of gold. Inflation is almost impossible. And so this would be very good for keeping a stable economy. Of course, it also means the government can't print itself out of debt by just printing a ton of money that is unbacked, which, of course, isn't really a wise idea to begin with. If you look at the German Reich towards in the 20s, when the economy collapsed and people were printing money by the bushel, and in Africa, there's some places where you go around with massive stacks of cash simply because of the low value of individual bills, which is problematic, to say the least. I mean, the reason people made paper bills to begin with was, for one, that it's easier to carry around than carrying around bits of gold everywhere you go. So, but then people eventually got rid of the gold and silver and all that, which meant that the paper was fiat currency. Basically, the government says it's worth something, and as long as enough people agree, then it's valuable. But then comes a point where if you just print a ton of it, it's devalued and becomes worthless. So that's always a vulnerability in an economy that uses fiat currencies, which are a lot of economies around the world, to be honest. So this is always a risk that happens, which is why a lot of people go for the gold standard. I personally like Ted Cruz. I think he's a great guy. I personally don't like FDR. I didn't like his policies. He was a bit too progressive for me, if you catch my drift. People say, oh, progress, progress, progress. Well, progress where to? Progress towards a better society. Well, if you look at people overall, the reason that recent years seem to have been less violent these last few decades than maybe the bulk of history is, number one, when looking towards the past, people tend to coalesce events because you have to think of a big picture, and you think of all these wars happening, and they didn't always happen at the same time, of course, just like in today wars have interludes and stuff. But also, the globalization helps keep a balance of power and helps keep people in check and accountable to each other, which normally wouldn't happen. Which is why it is usually better to have a national government than have lots of little city-states, because then who's going to hold who accountable for their actions? Because in small city-states, someone can get away with something, and people might not hold them accountable. But if there's a more overarching structure of accountability, such as the international community, people are more accountable. Of course, this does not prevent people from doing some very bad things, as we see in the Islamic State and North Korea, as well as China. But my point is, people overall don't really change too much, because people say, oh yes, society progresses. Well, a generation gets old and dies, and then the new generation has to relearn everything the previous generation knew, and these are the reasons why we sometimes lose technologies, not as frequently as before, because it's more literate society today. But people have lost technologies, and children can become more cruel than their parents because of this. Because every new generation is a fresh start for society, and people's brains can only function so much. People can only handle so much. People, in one lifetime, a person can only advance so much. And assuming everyone does this in everyone's lifetime, which is impossible, because there's always going to be some mean people and some people who are mentally ill, which I don't equate with each other. I don't equate cruelty with mental illness, although there is some overlap in that zone, because I believe that people can generally be just mean people and be evil. But Okay, so how did I get to this from the gold standard? Whew. Went on a real wild tangent there. Gold prices have plunged. Really? Oh, I didn't know this. Okay, how much? Okay, it's. I think gold is still better than basing the currency on the amount of bills there are. I think that's still a better thing than what we have now. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we have. And I think that's what counts. Okay, let's take a look at some other news stories. Personally, actually, I was thinking of maybe inventing a tabletop RPG to play. I'm not going to publish it, of course, because you never know when you're accidentally going to hit some sort of copyright issue with someone. But if somebody wants to play, then contact me via the comments. We can get together maybe on Skype and over Skype and play a tabletop RPG with multiple people, and it will be fun. Trust me, I'm a very creative person. It's very fun. Okay, let's see what the news has for me. By the way, for the search, I just put in the letter A, so I'm getting pretty much any title that has the letter A in it. There's a lot from CNN on here. The Verge, Vox, Wired. Just looking at what all the big news agencies are on Google search news. NFL playoff scenarios, how Texans can clinch the playoff spot. American football. I'm not really a big fan of team sports. I don't watch them in general. Sometimes I'll watch FIFA World Cup simply because it's so big and I like FIFA World Cup. I've always been more of a FIFA guy than NFL or Olympics or NASCAR. Really, NASCAR. It's I honestly prefer Formula One to NASCAR. That's just me though. Tell me what you think about sports. Which sports you watch? Which sports you don't watch? Do you even watch sports? I usually don't. I personally do martial arts, and I've sometimes gone to watch some competitions on it. Don't really participate too much though. It's not that I'm not good. It's just that I don't really want to put the work in. I'm kind of a lazy guy, to be honest. Pretty lazy. And well, I think there's something to be said for being a wholesome person, alright? I want to be a wholesome person, a nice person, a good person, and who doesn't want to be known as good? And then you look at people labeling others as good or evil, and I think there's a merit to being able to label someone, because obviously you can take someone's actions and see them as good or evil. But whenever trying to solve any problem, really any problem, you have to look at a couple things. You have to find out how things are and how things should be, and the solution to the problem is the thing that gets you from how things are to how things should be. And if things are as they should be, then there is no problem. But the difference in opinion as to how things are, how things should be, and how things can get from how they are to how they should be is what creates a lot of political and social conflict. As people want to solve problems in different manners, or people see certain things as not being problems. For example, capitalism, the stratification of society in rich people and poor people, some people see that as a natural thing, something that is natural and not a real problem. Others, such as communists and other socialists, see this as a big problem and they want to fix that. The problem is it's something that's really extremely difficult to fix. And one thing is, in order to fix this, they want to take things from others. That's one of the basic things you can look at to see whether an ideology is good or bad, is whether that ideology wants to steal things in order to fix the problems. For example, the Nazis, theirs was a lot of race-based ideology. They weren't fully super everybody's racist, of course, no, because that's a very absurd position to have. Of course, some of them were, but not all of them. But in their view, they could take things away from who they considered lesser races and give them to people who they considered better races, and that's the Nazis. As opposed to that, in Marxism, it was you take from the rich and give to the poor. So what you do is you create a collectivist group, a collective of people who are like-minded, or at least who you influence to become like-minded, and that is the in-group, and you create an out-group, and this out-group is the group that's either the big villain or the oppressors, and this is then villainized and attacked, which is what you can see in the violent Marxism and Nazism, and to be honest, some less violent social movements in the contemporary society, such as the sometimes extreme feminism, or the extreme factions in Black Lives Matter. Because Black Lives do matter, but if you get to the point where you automatically assume that certain people are racists, then you've taken it too far. And if you only assume they're racists because of their race, then who is the racist in this situation? Now, I'm not just talking about Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about any group of any race. If you automatically start assuming people of a certain ethnicity are racist, then there's a problem with your logic. You're assuming that people think a certain way because of the way they look. People think a certain way because of their ancestry. You're stereotyping, and that is a big problem that a lot of these people that are outspokenly anti-racist have. They go the step too far, and they not only put themselves as a collective, but they depict their opponents as a homogeneous group, or the people that they want to be their opponents as a homogeneous group, and then they end up antagonizing people and giving arguments for their enemies, which is why, due to a lot of these groups that are against the police and against this racism, they've been pushing so hard that a lot of the real extremist people that are actual racists and actually are white supremacists in this specific instance have been gaining members. So you really can't take things like that too far, because that's problematic. Problematic. What a great word. Also a terribly misused word in some instances. So I guess that's my opinion. Hope you had a great Christmas. Over and out.